would have been better if I would have already learned Romanian, then we wouldn't have to speak English. But I didn't.
Okay, we will let it for future, yeah. So soon when you will learn Romanian, we will make a meeting in Romanian.
Exactly.
But for a while we will speak in English. So generally I told, well, we discussed with our colleagues about your works. We seen your works on the exhibition in Biennale of Painting, in the selection of Biennale of Painting, and that a year ago also there was exposed in the museum. So with some colleagues twice we were there, and Doris works in different mediums, in oil painting you've seen, and by the way, your recent painting is on the background, and also make a ceramic, and recently was opened the exhibition in the Bucharest with interesting recent projects, Venus projects and Witness project. Hope you also will tell us more about that series of your works, and also make a printmaking. There's make a printmaking, and also hope you also will tell 2 words about that, and I think it's your turn.
My turn. Oh. So hi everybody.
Pleased
nice to meet you. Thank you for coming, and thank you for this opportunity to show my work. I have, to be clear and structured, I have prepared a little presentation. So I guess it's the easiest way if I share my screen and show you my presentation and talk about my work in this context. So I hope you all see my screen.
Yes.
I see. It's good.
So the cornerstones, well, as artists, our lives are directly connected to our works. So I start with a tiny introduction about who I am. Because we are all influenced by the circumstances which we grew up in. For me, I grew up in Vienna, Austria in the 1980s. And as you as art historians surely know, that growing up in Vienna in the 80s means growing up in the tension between the classical canon and the revolutionary forces. For example, manifested in the Viennese actionism and the Viennese school of fantastical realism, which I grew up with because our house was full of prints of Arik Brauer and Fuchs. But growing up in the 80s in Austria, in Europe, also, or in our world, also meant growing up in the tension of the Iron Curtain and the split world of 2 opposing political systems. So even as a child, I was learning very early that there's more than one way to see the world, and then there's more than one system to lead a society or how a society can form. So I guess that left a big imprint, and also later left a big imprint on my work. So you see a series that I started in 2015, which is basically a wall against walls. And it's part of a big series that has been determining my work for quite some years, the Urban Treasure Collection. But more to that. In principle, this idea of connecting culture, of living in unison and not in partitions, and to reflect on how other systems and how other mindsets show different or create different paths of living is very important for my work. So there's an impression of the wall. So I've been drawing since I'm a little child. art has always been part of my life, but my first studies were actually that of social work and Keltology. And only after I studied sculpture. The studies of social work, it gave me an overview of the bureaucratical system of society, or in this case of Western, or even more precisely of Austrian society. But also it gave me an insight into the struggles and difficulties of the victims that a political or, in this case, capitalistic system could ask, and how people get marginalized, how stories get marginalized. So I became interested in these marginalized peoples and their fate, minorities, and how like a society and its system can demand some victims. So this has been a series that I started in 2010, and this has been with me since then. So you see already that my work is pretty much based on big series of conceptual series that accompany me through the years, and that manifest in the different disciplines that I work in. So studying Keltology after social work goes back to my very early love for archaeology. Like, I've been obsessed with Pompeii when I was 7, and my mom had to buy me all the books that there were at this time. So like all comparative studies, the Keltology study gave me an overview over how about the system of a culture and how it manifests in art and form language. So for example, the political, the religious, and the bureaucratical system of in this case already sunken civilization has manifested in art history and literature history in a form language. So I have been starting with the Celts, but haven't stopped since, and keep studying different civilizations, different ancient cultures, and their basic principle system. Like, this is my diploma work for when I finished sculpture. So I actually created like a parallel society that archaeologists of the future should find in our layers. That was inspired by cross-studying a lot of cultures. And I even developed an alphabet in the same form language, because in many of the ancient cultures, like, there's a very concrete connection between the form language that is manifested in architecture, but also in writing. So this studying Keltology, which has all these studies, basically influenced my studies in art, and it has led me to this one key question: what will archaeologists of the future find in a layer of our time? Because for archaeologists, normally the political system and the religious system and the bureaucratical system, they're very well documented, but the real life, the everyday life of the people, is only found in the sherds of ceramics, in actually pretty much the garbage that the humanity leaves at this time. But it's most interesting because as people, we connect with the lives of the people and not with the bureaucratical system. So archaeologists tend to search a lot for signs of everyday life. So I've been asking myself, what will be left of our time? And well, to go basically, I could do that later. Apart from the apparent findings of, we can all think about what people will find. There will be garbage that we leave, the structures that we leave, but there will also be this ceramic archive, which is poetical and personal, but also political. To explain a little bit my artistic process, normally a new series starts with a question like, what will archaeologists of the future find in the layers of our time? And then I do a lot of research, thinking, building a conceptual framework that becomes more dense and clear while I'm making the works of art in the studio. And this conceptual framework gives me the freedom to explore and to become intuitive in my creational process. But unlike other artists who create from zero, I really need this framework that I create myself. So the Urban Treasure Collection, basically, as you see, has different forms. All these works have been done in clay. And I've been collecting, let's say, a sentence by Susan Sontag that I read very early in my studies. It really determined a little bit how I thought. It says, the camera makes everyone a tourist in other people's reality and eventually in one's own. So basically, in connection with researching how our civilization manifests itself, also in the small details, I have been traveling with my camera and a special silicone, which I can make, let's say, 3D photography and take imprints. And I've been traveling through our reality, my reality, and have been collecting a photographical and 3D archive of objective reality, which I then transform into, it's got mixed up, so here you see all my different study, it's a very fun process. So basically you stand in the middle of the street for 10 minutes, people pass you by, you take the silicone off after and can recreate a surface in ceramics to capture objective reality and then connect it with my personal subjective reality. And this is a dualism that I've been working or living within for quite a long time, is this tension between inner and outer space, microcosm, macrocosm. And I'll show you a little bit more about the manifestations of this series. So I collect graffitis by taking photographs of the places. This is in Rome, for example, and then transform them into printing graphics where I use etching and aquatint, most often aquatint, and mix it with papers I find on the street, with documents I find in flea markets, books, pictures, lava on Vesuve, to tell the stories of the banal everyday reality of the cities I go to, of the places I go to. I start from nothing, so even being in Paris, you can see me here taking my little imprint and then turning it into printing graphics and ceramics. Different cities, different spaces have their different manifestations. So living in Florida for a while and teaching there has opened my mind also to a little bit. It's also Western society, it's also capitalistic if you want, but has different form language. So basically, I intuitively search find without searching, and collect and try to open different views and see the beauty in the banal, but also research on the history of the place and the art history in the place. You know, this painting. And then create this archive. I work a lot with symbols. Some of them are very apparent. Some of them are personal that I invent. This symbol of the pineapple that is carved into windows or doors in Florida is actually their symbol of welcoming, which is when you live there as what you're called a non-residential alien when you work there. And the welcome has certain limits. So basically, this archive is also filled with personal encounters, personal experiences. I want to show you a short video of the process. So basically, I take the silicone. It's 2-component silicone. In the middle of the street, people watch me, people talk to me or not. Most of the time when I do it, it's like I have my own bubble and people, I don't see them and they don't see me. Sometimes I wonder how people can be in front of a blue silicone on the door and not notice it, but it also tells us a lot about the ways we are seeing the world or how conscious we go through it. And this last imprint that you actually see me taking here has raised a new question. So I've been working on this series for 3, 4, 5 years. And this imprint, which is a stumbling block, which is a series by, please see who started it. He's called Dmitri. So he has made bronze cobblestones that tell a story of the people who lived in the houses that are in front, who were deported in the war, who were deported by the Nazis and killed. So it's like a memory of the people who lived in these places. So in a way, working on this has raised my question. What are we witness of? We as human beings, that we live now. So what does it mean to be a witness? So here you see what I did with the imprint of this cobblestone. And this new question has brought a new formal language, because for me, it was important to confront the viewer in a more direct way. And the best way to confront is actually by seeing an eyewitness, by seeing somebody who looks you in the eye and asks you the question. So basically, these are my key questions for this series. What are we witnessing? What is the problems? What is the struggles of our society? What are we dealing with? What problems will manifest? Or like you see here, the chemical formula of PET, of plastic, which will be a big finding for archaeologists of the future. But also violence against women. Growing up in capitalism, again, has, of course, raised questions of how sociopolitically and correct life can be in capitalism, where greed is one of the biggest forces, and what damages living in this system creates on our planet. So my research for the Eyewitness series goes very much into the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, and they're reading their reports and also directly quoting the reports on the ceramic wall sculptures. But also, as a female identified human being living in this system, what does living in our society, living in our Western world, do to us as a human being? I can't generalize, so I'm speaking about, in a way, more about me and my personal experiences, but trying to find a general form for it. So also wanting to connect with art history. I wanted to take up one of the classical forms of sculpture, the Venus, and make a series about it. So talking about the symbols that I worked with earlier, this symbol is one that is recurring. I started to use it in 2018. So it's this seam that, for me, it leaves a question open. People can see it as they want, but for me personally, it is a symbol for, let me give you the example how it existed, how it came to existence. A woman in Bangladesh who makes the t-shirts for, let's say, Austria, bought in Europe, They don't make the whole t-shirt, but they only make one seam for hours and hours, for days and days. They always make the one seam of the t-shirt. The next woman makes the next seam. And this making only one seam and seeing only a tiny part, a tiny fraction of the big picture, is one of the strategies of capitalism to keep society functioning, to keep people out of asking too many questions and out of rebellion. So I use this kind of to raise these questions. What can we do as human beings to cope with the pressures of the system? How can we find beauty in it? How can we, what is the strategies that we can develop as a society to still connect? Here we go back to climate change and the victims that it leaves. So basically, as society confronts us with many, many, many questions, I also like to confront the viewer with all these questions and raise the questions, but then I'm living again in this dualism of raising the question, but also opening space for and a discussion for vision and dreams and for hope in a way. But yeah, some of the questions are, well, you can see yourself maybe. And also what kind of fears are raised within us. What, how do we deal with negative and positive liberty, or liberty in total, and what strategies do we have to move forward, or what makes us stay behind? This Venus is directly connected to the newest situation that we have to deal with as a society, with the pandemic and being isolated. How to deal with, like, now we're sitting on Skype. I have very fond memories of being in Chisinau, and I would love to have joined you for this meeting in person, but the situation made this impossible. So how do we deal with isolation, but what connects us as human beings? What connects us as society? And how can we find joy and happiness in even difficult circumstances? If we can't travel, do we travel through our windows? Do we travel through our mind? And how do we find paths to the inside space of ourselves to find strength and connectedness? So for me, working in art and being connected to the collective consciousness of my forefathers in art and foremothers and thinkers helps me a lot. So I go, like you would say, in my very in my bubble, in my very secret space, and my very alone space, where I find solstice and also advice and also knowledge and wisdom. Dima and me, we speak a lot about this, being like a recluse and spending weeks in the studio and just working hours and hours and hours of at our works or reading books is a great space of comfort and happiness. So here's some of the books that have highly influenced me. Like, for example, but you can read, it's Kandinsky's theoretical works, John Berger's Ways of Seeing, Susan Sontag on photography, Darcy Wentworth Thompson's On Growth and Form. And the last book that I'm stuck on for the last 2.5 years is Gaston Bachelard, The Poetry of Space. Because every time I read a chapter, it inspires me to make a new work. So I get stuck and I can't keep reading. But I want to finish this little presentation with, well, finish. I want to leave you with this sentence. And even if all the chambers of our loneliness have been left behind, the spaces where we have suffered, enjoyed, longed for, or betrayed loneliness, they remain undeletable in us. And strictly speaking, existence does not want to erase them at all. It instinctively knows that these spaces of loneliness belong to its foundations. So you see, this sentence directly inspired me to go into my original space of loneliness, which was my childhood's room, where you can see my books and my table where I was drawing, and my window into the world that I didn't like so much to go out to because I loved this space, so I stayed there a lot. So basically, for me, art is the cartography of a life's journey that shapes the continents of ourself, and with it, we shape the continents of our universes as artists. So, but I guess that's kind of it for now. If you want to ask some questions or.
Thank you very much, Doris, for so interesting discourse and so interesting introduction in your mind and process of the work. And of course, a lot of things that I knew about your ideas, your conception, and some series of works you still didn't tell about them, but the introduction in your space of interest was very interesting and captivating for me. Even I knew a lot of works and seen some works in the process of development, but for me it was personally a great pleasure to listen to it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I try to be very short, because if I start to speak in detail about the works, then we can sit here for the next 5 hours. I'm happy to do it, but in this way I try to give an overview, and then we can always speak about details if some of you want.
By the way, we aren't limited in 40 minutes. I recently received a notification. That's a gift from Zoom. My question also, but you told about printmaking in 2 words, and if you want now to maybe to tell more details about that's a part of your artwork, I mean the printmaking itself, if you can little bit more tell about that, and if you could also tell a few words about the itself, art life in Vienna, or I mean better, your maybe your projects in Vienna, which they are also too, because the biggest part of us don't knew at all a cultural specific. Maybe you of course made some introductory things, but you tell it in a context of your personal vision. But I mean more general things about art, you in art life of Vienna. If you could, that was my two questions in measure of possibilities, and you in a way you can tell answer.
But I guess I will start with the printmaking, because this was your first question.
Yeah.
I will actually, well, should I go back to a probably, well, you've seen it, or should I go back to one of the pictures of the printing graphics so you can see it in the background, or it's okay?
How it's okay for you? You decide how it's.
Well, I guess I better. Well, in principle, for me, the ancient technique, well, it's a very old technique of etching and aquatint, is extremely interesting, because it requires us to think in a negative way, in a double meaning. So you have to turn your motif around, and you also work from black to white if you want. So you cover, especially in aquatint, you cover everything that should stay white with black tar, and then with the graduations of your grayscale, you cover more and more and more of the picture until only the black spaces are left, which but remain white on the copper plate. So this process of total reversing the process in a way of going from the full plate to only the small spaces that will be black in the end, for me it's fascinating. And it's also fascinating that we never know what happens in the end. So if our process of our 12 grayscales that we planned by having the copper plates in the acid for 10 seconds and then 30 seconds and 25 seconds, whatever, we only know with the first print if it really worked or not. So for me, this is like planned improvisation, but with an open end. So in the end, sometimes there's some magical accidents that you never know how the finished product, the finished work would really look like. To me, this is really fascinating. And then to connect it with the things that I find has made the printing process more interesting for me, because with these printing editions, like we start with these printing editions, it became such a repetitive process that I found myself hating making the editions, because to print the same thing 21 times and to sell it 21 times, for me had not so much to do with making art, but with basically making a sellable product. So that's why I kind of stopped to make editions and more went to making what are originals, even if I use the plate several times.
Mm-hmm. I see.
But for the finding of the motives, in a way, you also have to, for me, I find that I have to have a different eye. I have to look for the motives in a different way than if I want to make a painting, because leaving the negative space, that gives me freedom for whatever is under, like an old bill or the grocery list I found of somebody on the floor, which basically is like a sign of his everyday life, requires to be seen on the print. So it becomes again a second step where I prepare the paper by painting it, by collaging the found objects, papier trouvé, on it, sometimes painting it again, and then at the last step I print aquatint onto it. So this is again this moment where I don't totally know if it will work or not. So also that's interesting, because sometimes also some of the papers are a failure because the idea was nice, but it just is full and you can't see anything. So sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't work, and that's an interesting process also, teaching me about patience and about being open and about being not expecting the killing my perfectionism that I have to live with. But it helps me to get out of it. Whereas in painting, as you can see, my perfectionism is in full bloom. And about the artistic life in Austria,
could I ask you if your discourse is not about the presentation, will be better for the video, because we make the video.
Yeah, sure.
when you explain.
You're right. Thank you. So yeah, and about your second question, Dima, about living as an artist in Vienna. It's a kind of difficult question, because maybe it's an Austrian speciality, but the Austrian society is very good in only appreciating its artists late in life or when they're dead. As you can see, from music to fine art, it's the same everywhere. You can look at Falco. He was famous in America, but only became famous or acknowledged or recognized in Austria as a musician after his death. But the very good examples are, for example, Maria Lasnik, who had a big career internationally and had her first museum personal show when she was 98. or Marte Jungwirth, who now receives recognition in Austria. She's 81, or Margot Pilz, who now I think she's 78. She has her first museum show in Austria, her first solo museum show. So this is something my professor in studying art has warned us about, that it's Austrian artists for Austria are as interesting as, I don't know, apples to an apple tree. So to seek life outside of Austria and to work internationally, to build a basis to become interesting for the Viennese art world. This was his advice, and I was young, and I thought that makes total sense. And so I followed more this path and tried to organize as much international, or be part in as many international exhibitions and residencies and symposiums as possible. And now I'm 41. So I'm thinking this series of artists being recognized with something at like 80 should stop, and it should become younger and younger and younger. So I'm working for this. But the art scene in Vienna is, I guess you would see it with different eyes than I see it as being from here. So, for example, I was just in Bucharest for 1.5 weeks for my exhibition there, and I experienced the art scene in there extremely lively and with a very active discourse, with a lot of experimental works, with a lot of courage and interest and kind of a breaking through spirit. Whereas sometimes in Vienna, I have the feeling that the art scene might have become a little bit stagnant and oversaturated. And so I have mostly kept myself out of the Austrian art scene, or out of the Viennese art scene, if that makes sense, for quite some years. And now I'm actually actively working to change that, to create a space in Vienna where everything that I seek and find outside of Austria and outside of Vienna, all this adventureness out of this interdisciplinary discourse, this connection, I want to bring that to Vienna. So I'm working with my husband, who is a photographer, but also with other artists who are part of the team from the beginning, like Dima himself. We're working on the Ministry of Artists to have a network and a cultural center in Vienna to make exhibitions and readings and performances and happenings, and bring artists and disciplines together, bring the audience and the artists together again, to kind of get this separation of let's say real life and culture, break this and bring it back together, to kind of bring life more into the visibility of like culture back into the visibility of everyday life. So that's, I don't know if that answered your question at all, but
of course, and totally, and really very interesting. And also I discovered some new names in your when you told about the Austrian context. And so by this project of ministry, we wanted to create in a way bridges and to introduce some new perspective in visual culture in Austria, or in the place, in the cultural context you work.
Yes, in Vienna, yeah, but also not only in the cultural context, but also in the context of like, if you want to say everybody, right? Now we have like a small group of people who our ex-chancellor even called them art lovers, with this very negative connotation. People who actually appreciate culture. It became a very small group because art became more and more elitist. So this basis of when I was a child, all my aunts and uncles, everybody had a theater abonnement, minimum one. it was totally normal to go to the theater. It was totally normal to listen to classical music, to different. Now it seems that this has kind of gotten lost a little bit over the last 15, 20 years. So, for example, in Corona, there was it was very difficult for us in this time in Austria, because the cultural sector was closed for nearly 1.5 years, with small breaks in between, where museums were closed for months in a row and galleries weren't allowed to open. So there was like a manifestation for, like a peaceful, silent manifestation for art and culture in Vienna, but it was mostly artists who were there and not so much the audience. So I think that connection between the audience and the art got a little lost, and we want to actively work to build a bridge and to make culture and art accessible to like really everybody again.
Great success with that project, and I'm sure it will open new, interesting, unexpected perspectives.
We hope.
It's absolutely certain.
But what you said was very important, and is bringing other perspectives to Vienna. So bringing perspectives from different countries, different cultural spaces to Vienna, to build these bridges that I think as a global human society we will need to find a more sustainable way of life in solidarity and connectedness.
Yes, it is totally. Of course, totally agree with you. It's so important at that moment, especially now. Also our audience, and maybe you wanna address some questions, or you're interested in something more detailed about Doris' discourse, or we would like to hear somebody. We would like somebody to join our conversation.
Yes, very much.
Dasha, your sound is off. Oh, okay.
Hello. So I just wanted to say thank you for your interesting presentation. It was very helpful and full of interesting information. So I saw that your art is like some social problems by doing it for your soul, and I like the way you're it was inspired by social problems, but doing it in a very beautiful way to attract people's attention to it, these very actual troubles. And I wanted to ask this all like capitalism and all these problems with women problems, are they so highlighted in Austria as in our countries? Because Austria is also Europe, and they were maybe more modern than us. And how does it feel to be a woman in Europe and an artist? So, like, how does it feel? I just want to know.
Thank you for asking. I guess it's always difficult to speak in general, because even if we speak with a lot of people about their experiences and about our experiences, in the end, we always see the world through our filters. So by living in different countries, and actively, but for example, when I studied social studies, I lived in Ireland for 1 year of it. So I studied more the social problems in Ireland than I did in Austria. But for me, of course, if you now take the capitalistic part of Europe, because you're like Romania is also part of Europe, and even Russia is part of Europe, part of it geographically. If you take what was before the Iron Curtain fell, the west of Europe, and which became capitalistic before the rest of the world, I guess it was. There's still some differences in all the different countries, like in Italy, in France, in Germany, in Austria, but there's also some similarities. So the overall problems of being a woman in this society are connected to in a way, the history of the system. So basically, from being not being able to vote and not having a political voice, which has been lifted in by the suffragettes, and it has been fought for by women all over Europe, actually. Although in some countries it manifested only much later, because, for example, in Switzerland, only 1974 women got the right to vote, which is quite incredible to me. But in general, the female positions in art history is something that has been neglected and overviewed for a long time. And I see a tendency in the last maybe 5 or 10 years that this is being changed, and that many positions, of course, the older ones got lost because they were never part of the canon. But maybe we're starting to have a more equal look at the role of women and men in society. And so I guess for me personally, I grew up in like a very comfortable way. My family, I grew up in a great family. I was surrounded by art. There was no violence in my direct family, or but for example, this year there's already been, I lost count now, because until June it was 21 women who were murdered by their husbands or boyfriends or spouses in Austria alone. So I guess it's difficult to draw a conclusion of how capitalism is influencing the life of a woman or the violence in society. I just think that the tensions and social tensions that are created by a society or by a system that you live in would probably influence the microcosm, like a family or a couple. But I don't know. How do you see that? Do you see a difference in how was it to grow up in Moldavia as a woman, or how is it to live as a woman in Moldavia?
I live as a woman in Moldavia. Very comfortable, because also I have chosen my friends and my family is very good, so I feel comfortable. But I think also in Russia it will be SNG countries, but yes, there are some troubles with the also patriarchy and all these women traditional troubles, which we haven't decided also then. But I couldn't say I feel very bad, but also I see the other troubles, and can say that maybe in some Scandinavian countries is a much better situation than it is also in Europe. But we have a goal to go better, to be better, and to respect the art, respect women, respect these personalities. Also,
this can be a global goal.
Yeah, I am going to do. I saw your art and it was very interesting to see the backstory of them in your presentation. So can I ask you some like common questions about your art and how you're doing it? So do you have some special rituals or conditions to create art? Where maybe some emotional state do you prefer to create? Like, how do you feel in these moments, and what is the best place to make your art?
That's a very good question, actually. Because there's different processes to making art. So, and especially with some of the materials I work with, some of them are very craft-based processes that take quite a lot of time, but don't require so much. They require focus and open like a space in my mind and give me freedom of thought, but they don't require like an active, creative, intuitive, creational space. So I guess I have different moments for different phases. There's this, I don't know how to describe this, but it's like a state of really heightened focus and consciousness where I feel extremely connected and open, and I feel like that there are ideas that are coming to me, if you want. So basically, if I have been brooding over a question and I want to make a series about it and I want to make smart about it, there is a process of this being pregnant with it in the back of my mind or something like that. And then there's these days when I feel totally connected and very inspired and very excited. Normally I can't really sleep on these. Sometimes it's 2-3 days and I can't really sleep. So like all the manifestations of these ideas, they come to me, I would write them down. And sometimes I would wake up with a picture of the first part of the first, I don't have my, it's like I wake up with a picture of this first object of the new series or something like that. And then I would write it down in the night and have always my book with me. And then I do the research. Then there's different days when I totally don't feel inspired. That's when I do my archive work and my bookkeeping, because I'm also, as an artist, you're like a business person. So you have to keep your archive and you have to make your taxes. And so on the uninspired days, I do this. And for the process of creation, it's mostly, I go into this kind of time out of time, and I wake up, have my coffee in the morning and sit down and see what I did in the day before. And then I just start to work, and I work until I'm hungry, and then I eat, and then I work until I'm tired and I have a coffee, and I work until I'm hungry and I eat, and then I work until my body hurts, and then I sleep, and I wake up the next day and it continues. So maybe you could describe it as this process of you have 15% of the creation is this the absolute inspiration at the beginning and the idea. Then, well, I have to get my maths right. Wait, did I say 15? I have to calculate. So it's like a small portion of inspiration at the beginning. Then it's a lot of hard like studio work. Let's say it's like 70%. So we're at 85. Then you have 15% again when you know, to find this moment when you know that the work is finished, to find this. And in this, of course, in this 70% of work, especially with ceramics, but also with the way I paint, other people, of course, have a totally different process. This is just about my own personal way of creating. But in this really long time of the making it, of creating, working with the hands, having my mind free, it's like a meditation time where I can find answers to what has been plaguing me about this specific question that I wanted to ask with this work, or it's like I can contemplate on it So yeah, I guess
Thanks. It was interesting and also inspiring. So thanks for your answer.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. Thank you for answering questions.
Thank you, Daria. Anybody else would like to address any questions or maybe feedback on?
Yes, I have a question.
Oh,
Hi, Eugenia.
Hi. Yes, I'm Eugenia. Thank you very much for your presentation. It was very interesting for me, and I want to thank you. But I have a question about, I have a problem with camera, that's why I can't.
Okay, no problem.
Okay, about the university. Which university is the best to study history of art in Vienna?
The history of art.
Yes, about history of art. I ask you because we have academy mobility, and I want to find some interesting, maybe for a few months to study.
It's an interesting question because I actually don't know so well because I never studied art history actively as a subject. I know that there is at the University of Vienna there's art history, so I think it's not the Academy of Arts that have the courses. But of course, whatever you study at the academies of art, there's always art history classes. So you could go to any of the lectures as a passive audience. You wouldn't have that quoted as part of your studies. You can always go to any lecture. But to study art history, actually, I think it's on the University of Vienna. But if that's good or not, to be honest, you'd have to ask somebody who studied art history, I guess.
Okay.
Sorry, I can't really say too much about it. I actually studied at the Vienna Art School, which is already like a subversive art school parallel to the Viennese academies. So my art history studies that I did in university were actually the anti-history of art, the stories that are not told, because our professor said all the rest of art history we can read everywhere. We can go to the she wanted to give us the history that is not taught in a way. So I'm like the worst person to answer this question.
Okay, thank you very much for answer.
Sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, I can't really say more.
thank you.
Thank you very much.
30 fingers from.
I have one question. One more question. Can I ask you?
Sure.
About the support of Ministry of Culture. How Ministry of Culture support the young painter or the young artist?
There are several paths you can go through to apply for subventions as a young artist. They are from Vienna. Austria is it's not divided, but it consists of 9 departments, and Vienna as the city is one of them. So either through the region, the department that you grow up in, or through the place where you have your studio in, or the place and live in, or you could apply for subventions from there. For example, I have my ceramic studio in the south of Austria in the 2nd county, and I got some subventions from the county of Burgenland as a subvention for young artists. There's some awards that you can apply for, and there's some grants that are given through the university studies, and there's some overall Austria grants and awards as well that you can apply for. But of course, there's much more artists than there is grants, like in every other country. So the competition is quite strong for them.
Okay, but how you became an artist? You must to graduate some university to become, or not, or just you said that I'm artist and I'd like to paint. How it's?
No, of course not. That's not enough. Well, it's enough to be maybe to feel like an artist, but of course the profession of an artist is also regulated in Austria. So if you study art through a university or the Vienna Art School, you're automatically recognized as an artist. So this was the case in my and then you register with the finance ministry as a free artist, and with the government. If you are an autodidact, if you learn yourself, there is also channels to get recognition. I don't know so much about them because I didn't have to walk this path, so I didn't study this path so actively. But there is like a committee where you have to show your work and a list of your exhibitions that you organize yourself, and then you can get recognition as an artist through that committee.
Okay, thank you very much. Do you have like Uniunea Artiștilor Plastici? How to say in English?
I know. Actually, the Union of Artists. Because yes. I got to know them also, but I got to know the Romanian version of it just now in Bucharest. But no, we don't have a central organ like that. We have a number of self-formed unions, associations that represent the artists of either, some of them are very old, like the Secession is a very famous one, but most of them were actually founded by artists to represent themselves. But this governmental, we don't have this system of the Union of Artists like Moldavia has and Romania has, and I don't know about Russia, but it's maybe a manifestation of our different political histories and systems. I don't know.
Okay, thank you very much.
I'm actually learning much about it through the many conversations that I have with Dima, and it's a thema that has been with me for actually since growing up behind the Iron Curtain, because I also went to Prague when the Iron Curtain was still active, and kind of felt as a child the difference in what felt to me like an injustice, like but we grew up with being like with a bias. We grew up with being taught about the other system by our system. So it's like they were opposing political systems. So I'm only starting to understand more about my own prejudices that I have, and learning to try and see without value the difference of the systems and what positive and negative outcomes this has for people on both, in all the different systems that exist on our planet. But thanks to Dima, I'm learning a lot. Learning a lot more about your world.
And as same as I learned very much about the Austrian and not just about Celtic Ireland. Things that you told me were very interesting, and it's absolutely mutual to me.
I have a question about, do you planning to visit Moldova one more?
I'm dreaming of. If COVID wouldn't determine the paths of our travels at the moment and the way our lives. For example, right now in Vienna, in Austria, we are in strict lockdown. Everything is closed. The shops are closed. The museums are closed. We're not allowed to leave the house unless we're working or having buying food or medicine. So right now I can only dream of visiting Moldova, but I'm surely planning to come back whenever
Okay.
the circumstances allow it. And when there's always a good reason to come to Moldova, because Dima is living there, and Chisinau is beautiful, and I haven't had enough time there in Moldova to also collect treasures of Moldova for the Urban Treasure Collection, which of course I want to integrate. All of you, thank you very much for all your attention and for giving me your time and interest in my life and work. Thank you very much. And Dima, thank you very much for your invitation. I'm very honored to have the opportunity to be part of this.
Pleasure is on our side, and it was absolutely captivating and interesting. Große Danke für deine Ansprache.
Mulțumesc.